Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you.
Yes.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, Bernard, everybody, thank you so much. I'm already a few minutes late. I was trying to get in and I had some Windows restart issues, and that took a few minutes. Today, I'm hoping that I would walk you through a couple of slides that Kaushik and I put together for the upcoming event, and we'll discuss the rest of the logistics around the event and also discuss what are we doing for the day 2. Dol has also put together some agenda items and we will review that. And I think we'll leave the rest of the half an hour for the service assurance discussion, which was actually not finished last time. If that agenda looks okay, I will dive into it and start sharing my slides, and we can review the flow of the presentations that we are trying to put together for the events. And of course, it's all open to discussion. And the reason I'm bringing to the community is to gather enough feedback so that when we present there, at least we have some voice from the community in the messages that we are giving out. All good? You find that? Dol, were you able to find the PowerPoint that I shared with you yesterday?
No, I did not see it.
Okay, but you found it, right? Where the reason I'm asking is that I'm not able to share with my Google externally, but if you can, maybe we'll, as a next step, we can share that with the community and we can open it for comments.
Let me see
Or
if I
I'll
can
think
open.
Kaushik to do that. Sometimes, I mean, most of the time Kaushik does that. I haven't had a chance to think of with him today. He's not gonna be making today's meeting.
Okay, I think I can share it. Do you want me to share my screen?
I can share my screen because I'm going to skim through this very quickly. But if you can share with the community and link the link here.
Oh, that's what you mean. Sorry. Yeah, I got it. I'll do that right now while we
Okay.
while you present. Okay.
Okay, awesome. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thanks, Bernard. And I really don't like the feature that as the moment you start sharing your screen, you can't see people anymore. I wish there was a possibility to see both together. So the first day of the agenda, as Kandan and everybody else in the event planning group was discussing, and Tol has been there, we were thinking that for the broader audience who are actually sitting at the event, we need to give them an introduction and a high level view of what a particular SIG is doing. So Kaushik and I explored that. The first day we'll keep it pretty high level. Try to give everybody a sense of what SIG architecture's role is, how we have structured our working groups, how each working group is focused on giving some deliverables. The second day, I would like to have the leads from those working groups to actually come and present some of the work that they have been leading. And any volunteers that we can get for these individual SIG groups to come and present, even if you don't have something extremely formal to present, we can explore ideas with the community here. And like I was discussing with Tol yesterday, that could be an opportunity for us to gather comments and to basically brainstorm with everybody face to face in that room. So 3 main things. We'll discuss the working groups. I wanted to discuss some output of the architectural working group, which I have put together. And here's just a couple of slides that I will open to the community to review. We'll put one slide at the end in which I have drafted all the working groups evolutionary path. For example, where this working group is today and how would this eventually lead into a vision that satisfies the overall architecture of the nephew and how it intersects with our north, south, east, west APIs. So maybe that evolution can be captured in one of the looking ahead slides. Now I'm going to get into this architecture slide. You probably have seen other versions of the slide which were not editable, but this version should be fully editable by the community. And once Tol shares that, feel free to comment on any interface or any icon what makes sense to you, ask questions. I think we'll go through the iterations of improving this diagram that reflects the very abstract high-level view of Nephew, how it intersects with the existing automation ecosystem. And maybe it's different for different people, and we will incorporate that view to make it more relevant to the community's representation of Nephew and how it intersects with the existing brownfield. If you want to expand on the GitOps DevOps block, feel free to edit the diagram, and we can continue to. I can also do like one ad hoc session to review any changes that you would like to make to the diagram to make it more generalized. One thing that I would like to keep in mind is that this is extremely high level. I haven't gone into the details of the interfaces. This is for people who are not even familiar with what the project Nephew is and where does it even sit in the world. Like a couple of people from my own organization, I was working with some of the Nephew related POCs, and I was getting some funds approved. And during that process, my VPs asked, we already have a service orchestration, we already have network slicing, and we already have Kubernetes from different providers, including Google. What is it that Nephew does? And for me to be able to give them an answer that it's extension of Kubernetes, it's going to augment the existing automation framework that is done for network slicing and service orchestration by adding itself in a layer. That layer is currently, as I understand, and I presume is filled by a lot of vendors' proprietary tooling that manages the network function level deployment and lifecycle management. And that's where it fits today. But tomorrow, maybe the product or the project both evolve in a way that starts to do some of the things that are done in service orchestration, and maybe this Nephew icon would be represented elsewhere too. So on a very high level, I'll go through this diagram and start getting questions, but I wanted to show you two things. And the other diagram—
Sana, can I have some comment? I think this diagram confused me a lot. The reason is the SOL3 and Kubernetes API and OIO2 Kubernetes API from SMO. The thing is, this SOL5, SOL3, OIO2 is imperative operation. It's a RESTful based. You send request or acknowledgement, or you get the response. And Nephew has indirect the repository based triggering system, CR, and Git based, and then that's why all the mechanism Nephew does.
I completely agree.
Yeah, but the reason is even the Seshu, hope Seshu was here. Seshu SMO, when he's brainstorming SMO, he positioning the O2 IMS DMS the interface southbound of Nephew when we're talking to Okra. So that's why many confusion here, because the Sandeep—
We'll review that. I agree with him. I understand where the O1 and O2 interfaces go. So to address your first confusion, Bernard, you are 100% correct. Kubernetes APIs are in no way SOL3 API. And we can change that tag. We can remove that. But I wanted to explain you the purpose of why this is here. Basically, we wanted to show the relative positioning of Nephew, and SOL3 APIs does not mean that we are implementing the SOL3 APIs. Maybe there's a better way to use that tag, but explain that it's going to be the Kubernetes APIs performing the function of SOL3. So if you open the SOL3 APIs, what does it say? It actually drives us through user stories. Instantiate a network service, terminate a network service, delete a network service, lifecycle management network service. Sorry, network function, all network function. I missed that. So that
one comment before. I'm sorry, one comment before. Instead of using O1 or 2, I think basically the Sandeep and other Alex just mentioned about we means let's say Oren pass intent into Nephew. Okay, there is some there's a GitHub based partially all the system, and we provide the CR. So it's different from O1 or 2 Kubernetes API. So that's why if someone see this diagram, it's very confusing. And also if Oren Seshu providing his diagram is different, and Alex and Sandeep show his diagram, then it will be different. So every diagram has different caveat and different way of handling. That's why I'm saying
we need to converge. I agree, but not.
Okay.
We need to converge.
Okay.
Now,
Got it.
I got your angle, and I completely agree with you. The O1 and Sol 3 is a very prescriptive term that makes people believe that that's exactly the APIs that we are going to implement. O1 and O2 APIs don't even exist in the standard of ORAN today. We have production deployment of first ORAN in the world. We are very closely working with the ORAN Alliance, and I can talk to the people from ORAN Alliance on what we have done for O1 and O2, and you're 100% right. Nephew is not going to produce the O1 and O2 APIs in a way that the specs describe. Maybe there'll be Kubernetes APIs performing the function of O1 and O2. And I'm not going into the O1 and O2 APIs details, but on a very high level, what I'm trying to tell you is that I can remove the Sol 3 and Sol 5 tags completely, and we can replace that with the user journeys. And the user journeys would be a big cap of things. Maybe I'll have to write instantiate network service, delete network service, lifecycle manage network service, and all those APIs, when they're expressed in the K8 APIs, are going to be responsible for filling this interface, because that's what's going to interact with the service orchestration. I need those APIs to evolve eventually, because myself, we, and many other service providers could be using a service orchestrator. And if I'm not wrong, Bernard, there are a couple of instances of service orchestration, even in DT, but depends on how you operationalize that. But if there is a point in your stage of your basically organization when you start to incorporate Nephew with the existing brownfield, you might want to use those to manage the network function level deployment through your service orchestrator and merge it with the existing brownfield. Maybe we don't have to do that. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Yeah, maybe Sana, I think it's very confusing also. I think I will remove all the Sol 3 API and so on. Remove all this from the diagram, because at that time I'm not sure we're on the same page, and I can share my vision on how we are using Nephew internally in some POC. Typically, for example, my service orchestration typically is pushing intent in Git directly. Okay. So it's another way also to communicate between service orchestrator and Nephew, for example. We have many ways to do it. You can use Git, you can use the
so
UI.
Eric, your way can be expressed this way.
Exactly.
With our
we push to Git. Exactly.
That's so my point too. Because we have an indirect connection. Yes.
Exactly.
Correct. So as long as we are able to express, as long as we are able to express one diagram that shows different integration models with different POCs, we should arrive at a generic model. Now, I replaced Sol 3 completely because it's creating more confusion than understanding. We can replace those arrows by giving it some blocks, and I'll replace the Sol 3 word by giving them the user journeys. Now, what does Sol 5 means to me visually? If I look at Sol 5, that one word tells me that this is all about network service. And we also have the network slicing solution operationalized in production today. So I have a first-hand work experience working with Sol 5. And honestly speaking, even today, Sol 5 doesn't have a very complete list of APIs. So what is eventually happening is that the particular service orchestration has its own not-bound APIs, which are richer than Sol 5. So the interface, we still call it Sol 5, just because it's easier to reference, which interface APIs are we talking about? But in reality, we are using all the service orchestration product APIs, because we instantiate the network service, create network service, lifecycle manage network service. All of them came well before Sol 3 was even mature or materialized. It's a way of referencing the interface.
I'm very confused also to see all the CSMF and SSMF on top of the service orchestration, because it's a bit strange for me, because for us the service orchestration is much more above this function. So I'm a bit surprised the way you describe it in a diagram.
This service orchestration in reality is basically an FCO. Now, these are the product terms, right? The product terms, right?
That's why I tried to mention the service orchestrator naming says confusing. So when you put NFO,
it's a very confusing
service
term.
orchestrator.
Right.
So because there's end-to-end service orchestration and the network resource service orchestration, that's why once you put NFO is clear, And
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I agree.
Okay, so
Okay.
with that might have reduced, and the purpose of this discussion is to ensure that this is fixed. So I removed those two, Sol3 and O2 completely here, but I do want to describe these arrows. So maybe a very small model of describing the interface of those arrows and showing what kind of APIs would exist here would be to put a color. And with that color, I can insert a block and show that not all the user journeys, user stories, but maybe some, that's the scope of the network function, right? And this is the scope of a network service. And this is how Nephew is going to intersect north, south, east, west, and maybe a couple of user stories on those interfaces as well. And I'm going to open the document for comments, and anything that you want to insert, put the comment, and we need to do one more session to come together, review this together, and edit the things that we should edit. And I'm also going to explain what's inside this blog. And this is also open to comments and questions, because I received something from Eric. Tall might have views. And let's make sure that this is describing a good view of what the product or the project Nephew is in the current state of things. Eventually, it can evolve to become service orchestrator or NFPO or even network slicing. Let's not go there. This is an evolutionary view, and this can change. But today, what it can do for us. So to me, we are creating operators and CRDs, which I showed in this particular blog. And they are 3 arrows going down from them on a very high level. People who have not understood the role of Nephew can get to see what is the responsibilities of those operators and CRDs that the community is producing. We don't deploy infrastructure, we configure infrastructure. So I had this configuration icon with that.
Sana,
Yeah.
we need to be clear on that, because for R1, we are deploying infrastructure. So
Go ahead, Bernard. I missed your last audio.
this is Eric, but I'm just telling that in Nephew R1, we are deploying infrastructure using kind and CAPI. So today it's not only deploying CNF.
No. We are deploying. Are we installing Kubernetes on bare metal?
No, we are deploying cluster, Kubernetes kind cluster,
Deploying
using
clusters,
CAPI
right? Deploying
operator.
clusters on already deployed Kubernetes.
No.
So
We are deploying Kubernetes cluster.
we're deploying Kubernetes clusters. So I'm saying the cluster level work we are doing, the preparation of the network function level work we are doing. We are not, so in a private cloud environment, we are not bringing a bare metal up server through Nephew.
Yes, but
So
we are
maybe I
deploying
can
the
help.
clusters, configuration of the clusters. We are doing the SRIOV DPDK configurations. We are preparing that cluster for incoming workload. We are not bringing a bare metal server up and installing Kubernetes on it.
okay, okay for that. Okay,
right?
Yes.
So
yeah,
maybe there is a better way of explaining that. But our role starts when the cluster, when the Kubernetes environment is available, but now we have to configure that environment for our use for a given network function in target. So we have network function in mind, say for example, UPF. And now I want to provision this particular environment to match the requirements of a targeted network function, which could be UPF. So how many clusters do I need? How many networks do I need? How do I configure the SRIOV, DPDK, CPU pairing, huge pairs? All that configuration is a scope of Nephew. And that scope is in context of the network function that we are going to deploy. So are we agreeing on that aspect of the infrastructure? How do I say it?
Not fully, Sana, because today, I'm sorry, but in release 1, we are able to deploy, we included a CAPI operator to deploy some clusters.
No, clusters we can deploy. Clusters is a soft entity. We're deploying and configuring the Kubernetes clusters and managing and the configurations of the clusters to onboard the incoming NF.
Yeah.
Making it very careful that a lot of people have been getting confused that maybe it's going to do everything bare metal up, which is not going to be the focus.
I agree, Sana,
right?
but we just need to be clear. I mean,
yeah, being very careful with the choice of words, right? And everything we do on a given cloud environment, we do in the context of the network function that is an intent of deployment for a given scope of work. Then we deploy a CNF. And I intentionally put CNF, not NF, because it's always going to be a containerized network function. And then we configure the network function.
Sorry, Sana, once again, why our target is only CNF? I disagree with that. With Nephew, I think at the end of the day, we should be able to deploy, maybe to configure VNF and so on. We are not linked to CNF for, as far as I understand.
I see that we will always be working on Kubernetes environments. So VNF would come with other kind of environments. Is there an appetite or a way for us to eventually orchestrate the OpenStack-based deployments or the VM-based deployments? I haven't seen that.
Not today. But there are some tools to do it. There are some tools where we can use Kubernetes-based model to be able to deploy some VM-based.
Maybe I can try to
yes,
to clean this up a bit. I think from SIG2's perspective, we're allowing both, right? So you know, there are two scenarios where you already have a catalog of sites, pre-existing sites, and you're just using them. But you know, we have all these subsystems to provision sites, and for example, if you're using public cloud, obviously you're requesting a cluster to be created for you, right? And if you can do that declaratively or non-declaratively, it can interact with those systems. And you know, some even bare metal support, right? If you're using Red Hat ACM, which is also declarative, you could create the cluster there. So we're not forbidding it. You know, Nefio could work with pre-provisioned clusters, or it could interact with the system that provisions this. And in fact, it's kind of strange, but we mostly right now do the second one, even though I think it's going to be the rare use case. But the reason we're doing this because we don't have bare metal, right? For testing purposes, we do have to provision our own clusters, which we do on virtual machines, right? For testing purposes, so people can download and start to use it. But that's the opposite probably of what it's going to be in the real world, where you know everybody here is correct. You usually have the sites already prepared with some sort of infrastructure management, and Kubernetes is probably even already there. Although even with that, it's a little bit complicated because we have requirements for Kubernetes too that come from network functions that we want to handle. So we have a task force right now called NF to Infra in SIG2 that we're dealing with it. So the devil is in the details here, but we're not forbidding either approach, right? And both of them are supported in a way. Although provisioning clusters is of course a huge, you know, there are so many ways to do it, and CAPI, which is the cluster API, is extremely limited. It will not solve the bare metal use cases. Those things are out of scope for Nefio to handle, but Nefio should be able to interface with those systems.
Yeah, but if I could say something, just be careful, right? Because you're messaging to a community, and if you're going to try to make the statement that says Nefio is more than just you know, development of or deployment of workloads on Kubernetes clusters, then you know, you very well may lose focus of what, and you may not be able to do what you do very well. Right. And so
I agree
I would be very careful.
I'd be very careful. Yeah, as well. Right. And you know, I was not expecting that this particular part of the diagram would have any confusions, because that's something that me and Kandan has been presenting to our sales pitch when we went to Amazon, when we went to other service providers to do some of those works. We're in a very abstract way telling that the operators and CRDs are actually going to work in three pools. One is infrastructure configuration, one is network function deployment, one is network function configuration. Now, the terminology can have different meanings for different people. And at the end of the day, I think after all that discussion, we are all aligned that that's exactly what's happening. Now, what does deploying mean to you? Maybe that means something different to you. What does provisioning and configuration of the clusters mean to you? Maybe that means something else to me. Sure. But we are kind of aligned on the scope of network function and all the pre-work around that, and on the focus of the network function and eventual configuration and lifecycle management all falls under the current scope of Nephew at the moment.
So let me try to put it in a different way that doesn't alarm anybody.
Right.
So a lot of these diagrams are top down, right? We always have the cloud and the infrastructure at the bottom, but we have been talking about east-west integrations as well. So think about site management as an east-west integration, right? It's not that Nephew is on top of it and managing it. I think that's what's alarming. When you look at something, a diagram like this, and think, oh, Nephew is actually managing the infrastructure, people get very, very alarmed. So it's an east-west integration.
Just hold on, Sana, just to be clear, because I just want to avoid confusion. Today, in release 1, we did some demonstration, and as you said, Tal, I fully agree with you. It's one case, the real case where we deploy Kubernetes cluster because they should be deployed previously, and we should be able just to configure them within Nephew management. But we have to be careful about what we provided in release 1, because maybe, as you explained, it was just to demonstrate the capability of Nephew to do it, but that should not be, let's say, the normal usage of Nephew. But we just need to be clear on the way we communicate, on also on the way about what is available in release 1 today.
Correct, Eric. Short-term scope of Nephew.
Just we should be on the same page. I think we are, but we are just to be careful about the way we communicate. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely right. And we are also not going to, like I said, any vision of the diagram that presents the intersection with the rest of the components is evolutionary in nature, which means that because the natural and organic growth of the project and the community can drive maybe the east-west side way more than our north-south side, right? How we are using Nephew is going to drive that. So this is changing. But what the current mode looks like, how some people can actually put this together and understand, oh, that's where Nephew fits, is going to be at least some work at the stage that we can show to the community. So for example, if someone comes with the ONAP background, maybe they can say, oh, that's the layer which is interacting and replacing the VNF manager kind of a role. To me, this is a generic VNF manager today. I'm not diminishing the role of Nephew, but to me, in a very short-term reality, if it successfully does that and it can accomplish that, I think that's a huge success in its form. We were not able to use Kubernetes-based APIs, all of it, for containerized network functions deployments in the past. We were using some custom tooling from custom vendors, and we probably did not need a VNF manager when we started working with Kubernetes, but that they existed. They are still there. One successful adoption of Nephew could be replacing that layer completely. And I'm very strong on that because that would enable Kubernetes to become a generic VNF manager, and Nephew is actually allowing us to do that. Then how does we fit in the rest of the world? If that happens in the short term, maybe the service orchestrators and the network slicing, if they are still on the ground, how would Nephew eventually intersect with that? So for example, today, if I replace all my VNF managers and I'm working with the GitOps and DevOps tooling and I'm trying to manage all my infrastructure and network function deployments and onboarding to the cloud through Nephew, I would still need a mechanism for the existing NFCO or the service orchestration level functions to interact with that resource-centric layer. And how do we enable them to talk to Nephew? Would be through those APIs. And that could be a discussion which we can drive in that exercise. So I'm still waiting for more questions and comments. And I saw some very good comments on the chat as well. And we can actually incorporate every comment and make sure that this diagram is not confusing. It's basically a good point of discussion and communication and brainstorming our ideas together. Even in the event, if we present that, I'm expecting there'll be lots of questions, lots of comments, and we need to make sure that those questions and those comments are handled, because that's what we will use to understand how the community thinks and what is basically the thought process of people in the room who are trying to see Nephew for the first time. The other parts that I did want to bring to you were the three things: the APIs, the CRDs, the SDKs, and whatever we need to represent here as icons. Maybe Tol, I wanted you to take a look at this as well. So people in the room who don't know what is coming out of the Nephew code that I can use today to basically start using for my network functions and infrastructure provisioning, in what form is the code supplementing my existing Kubernetes deployments that I can use right away? So for example, these multicolor cloud underneath shows different types of cloud environments, but I kept the Kubernetes as a common denominator. Short term, again, I'm not putting OpenStack and all other variants in this because for the short term, we are interacting with Kubernetes APIs a lot. So maybe what is it that we use from Nephew project open source code that enables me to do something with this today? So Tol, do you have any comments on that? Or of course, Bernard, Eric, everybody else.
Yeah. Just maybe.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say maybe in Nephew, maybe what is missing today, or maybe that is not understood by the ecosystem, is also the capability to manage packages, to specialize them, and to. We are using the GitOps approach also. I think, and we should maybe put more details on that, because today it's not very clear in this diagram how we are using this kind of GitOps approach with Nephew. And that's for me also, is that something very new globally, and maybe we need to show in the building blocks of Nephew that we are also using some capability to manage these packages on the way to do it. That is very powerful, and it doesn't appear in this global picture today. It's not very
Eric,
easy
what
to
would
explain.
be a good way? What would be a good way to describe that? If this diagram is shared with you, like in a super high level, is there a way that you can expand on the GitOps and DevOps block and the interaction between that, right? The interaction between that, describe that in a little bit more detail, and that can capture the flow that is in your mind from Nephew.
Might we not also try to simply list the questions, the open issues, which we definitely would like to address over the time, not sort of trying to convey the messages that we already have the perfect picture already in mind, but saying, yes, there is going to be a northbound interface to the service orchestration part. We need to find out sort of via which mechanisms we need to establish that. We need to take care of the artifacts when managing the life cycle. So we could have sort of different elements and then have sort of the questions which we need to address in that context.
Right. So once that's a very good idea, Bernard, to drive the discussion forward. So once Tol shares this diagram, maybe I'm looking for inputs to gather more questions on each interface and see how do we address those particular questions and make this more reflective of everyone's thought process. And
I think we corrected all questions. As Bernard said, we're gonna rediscuss about this because there's a lot of issue with this diagram. If you look at really detail, SOL 005 API. As soon as you introduce SOL 005, you're talking about SOL 001 modeling, and also asynchronous and acknowledgement, all the reverse direction for granting, all the complication coming into this picture. So, and also Subhash mentioned about how at the O2 FM, PM, and that's the reverse direction and coming in. Who's going to collect? How are you going to collect? And then since we are using GitHub-based indirect mechanism, but Nephew wants talking back to SMO, what's the communication? That's why in this diagram, talking one direction, that's simplified, but there are many hidden the function. Somebody look at this and probably say that. But anyway, through the question, probably we can. This
is the same question. This is the same question that Bernard had on SOL 003. So the arrow with the SOL 005 does not, SOL 005 is not touching Nephew at all at the moment. Not at all, right? It exists in the industry. If you work in ONAP, if you work in other industry efforts, you see how 3GPP automation APIs communicate with the HC APIs and how that communication happens. There is an agreement in the industry that they interact on SOL 005. Now, I also gave you the reality that I have the production deployment of these things, and SOL 005 is not sufficient, which means that we are using our own APIs. And what does SOL 005 say? Says that's the scope of network service. Now, again, like I removed SOL 003, and I'm going to replace that with the comments from people and ensure that we have some user journeys listing those arrows. We can do the exact same thing for SOL 005, and that would be a more realistic capture of the reality of those APIs. Ideally, I think only 20% of SOL 005 APIs are there today that are actually capable of helping you create an EMBB network size from an orchestrator. The rest of the 80% are coming from maybe that particular deployment of the orchestrator, which has its own REST-based APIs. So we are, to some extent, we could be compliant with the SOL 005, because if you're using Tosca, maybe that's, you are to some degree compliant to the SC recommendations. But to a large extent, the schema, the resource modeling within those APIs, it's all REST-based and it's all proprietary. Nobody's actually following SOL 005 either. So if that helps, I can remove SOL 005 as well. And just like what we have discussed and brainstormed, we can replace that with the user journeys as well. Maybe you're right. Maybe people are not complying and following the SOL 001 and packaging formats and Tosca at all. How do we, if SOL 005 is making it look prescriptive, that was not the intent. It was showing the scope of the interface, but it's not doing that work, because somehow the moment we put the standard interface name, people get to those conclusions, and that could be confusing. So we'll actually replace all these arrows with the user journeys. And then however we evolve, and implementation level details of those user journeys cannot be prescribed. That would leave it open to imagination, right? However that interface evolves eventually. Would that address your concern?
Yeah, yes.
And I know,
yes.
right? So we should do that. I think that would help us. And maybe we don't touch Etsy at all, which because it's very prescriptive. The APIs, their resource modeling, their packaging requirements, it's all very prescriptive, and people can get confused that maybe Nephew is attempting to produce that, which I don't see any intention or requirement for that. So we'll replace that with user journeys. Anything else?
So I have my hand up, but I know you can't see.
I can't see. Tol, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I do think this, so this diagram is confusing in two different ways. One, that it involves the Etsy hierarchy from top to bottom, the pyramid. And the other, that I think it kind of mixes operational with architectural aspects of Nephew, right? Because Nephew is here presented as another layer. And to an extent, from Etsy's perspective, yes, it's a lower layer of orchestration. But Nephew does not use Etsy concepts, right? So just like we put GitOps on the side here, so I'm digging into a point I made earlier that I don't think the Kubernetes clusters should be under. I think they should maybe move to the right here as a east, if you will, configuration, because everything you wrote down there, SDKs, CRDs, they're actually living below, right? Nephew does what I like to call side-by-side orchestration rather than top-down orchestration. So technically, we do have a management cluster that is on top of the workload clusters, but everything that you put in here is not part of what the management cluster does, right? So operationally, yes, the management cluster does do the kind of GitOps side of things for us, but it is, the critical issue is, at Google, at least, the management cluster doesn't even talk to the workload clusters. They're completely peers. Right, they all communicate together via Git, which I know is not something that all clouds do, but that's how the Google GDC works, right? So I would put those clusters on the right rather than on the bottom, and to show that Nephew works side by side with Kubernetes. It's not a layer on top of Kubernetes that filters Kubernetes for you in any meaningful way. It just fills in various gaps in Kubernetes to make it easier to work with some of these concepts, right? I think doing that would maybe clarify this diagram. I don't know, clarify, but at least not be as confusing as it is right now.
Yeah, Tao, one, I think I second some of them because originally when I first time saw Nephew, we saw Nephew is below NFEO or SMO. We feel that way, and because we think they are handling about CNF and others, but later on Nephew they introducing the management cluster, and then now we talking about Nephew talking about some of the network service level. And then affinity, which workload cluster they're gonna distribute to, they control that one. That's a little conflict, not the conflict, stepping on the NFU area. That's why bring down in under the NFU, yeah, as you said, it's confusing. So so NFU is
I
kind
think
of a,
I think you're right. Yeah,
yeah,
I do
yeah,
think it's eating into a little bit of the NFEO responsibilities, which is a good thing because it makes them easier. But the issue is not NFEO. The issue is Kubernetes. Kubernetes is
yeah,
not a Vim, right? Kubernetes
right,
is not something that would provision things. It is itself an orchestrator. So when you're embracing Kubernetes, and this has nothing to do with NFEO, if you're using Kubernetes and you're using it correctly, then already the NFEO has to do much less work. It doesn't have to do complete LCM, provisioning VMs and things like that, right? NFEO doesn't have VMs. NFEO is a completely declarative interface. So
yep,
sorry, not NFEO, Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So just by using
correct.
Kubernetes, the NFEO becomes a little bit more lightweight. But yeah, that's not
Right.
something we're showing in this diagram because again, it's confusing when you use the Etsy model because Kubernetes kind of ruins parts of that model.
Right. Kubernetes destroys and challenges the Etsy model, and Tal, I agree with you. So this diagram is very similar to the diagram that I have worked on with Kandan, and it's a part of the charter. So maybe we have a discussion with Kandan and review that does this diagram still reflect the Nephew scope in the broader industry? Not everyone in the industry knows Nephew as is. And what we are discussing here is that we are going a lot in detail into the mechanics of this particular layer itself. But what the intent of this diagram in the beginning was that in the broader industry, where the rest of the factory is going around network slicing, a whole 3GPP standard and a models and lots of production deployments are happening in the world, and where lots of service orchestrations are operationalized and people are working on the SMOs and things like that, in that broader sense of things, how would they see with the existing brownfield where Nephew is? And 99% of the people Tal in the world are actually looking at the reference implementation, which is built top down. Look at 3GPP, look at ONAP, and look at Etsy. I'm not saying that they're right. I'm saying that that's the model of interpretation which has existed in a very large spectrum of the community. Now, there are two ways to address that. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm saying it's a way to show them with the language that they know and something that they have seen before to show where Nephew is, and that would help them understand this right away. Now, what we can do as an alternative exercise is that Tal or Eric and you guys bring one more diagram, and we could replace those parts eventually to reflect how would our north, south, east, west APIs communicate with the rest of the things. I would love to see your view. I'm just hearing that in words, but I think
yeah, I'll
let's
do it
attempt
live.
to draw
I'll share it in a minute.
before the event, so we can converge on something and we can have an extremely high level view. It doesn't have to have the design level details in it, so that we can explain to basically a broader community on how we are seeing the evolution. And I would love to discuss this diagram once with Kandan as well, just to see that if it's aligned with the existing charter and explaining a little bit more, is there anything wrong with that to present as is, or is it something that we could completely remove and replace? And this is not about Nephew's internal design either. It is about how Nephew intersects with the rest of the world. And that's what we need to be very focused on at the moment. The cloud not at the bottom, the cloud on the right, and Nephew on the left, we can still do that. I mean, I don't see a problem doing that. But how would the NFEO and SMO interact with the cloud? If you look at the SMO diagrams, they put the cloud at the bottom as well. We still need to position the rest of the things in a way that finds interfaces to communicate with those things. But maybe there is a way. Give it a go, Kandan, Tal. Maybe we come up with something better, and maybe that's more reflective of the current state of things. So this is the first attempt. It's open for comments, open for questions, and open for edit. Every block within that is editable. So you can change icons, replace icons, shift around things, move around the boxes. If If Eric, you feel like create another version of the diagram, if you feel that we can expand on the GitOps and DevOps a little bit and expand on this interface per your POC, I think that would be an excellent extension of this view as well. And we'll wait for some comments on all these interfaces, and we'll come up with a list of user stories that describes these interfaces, because that exercise will actually help us build a roadmap for those APIs, which we can then incrementally incorporate into our planning. When which API is getting delivered, maybe that will be an incremental roadmap for us to build after that exercise. Agreed, Kandan? I'm sorry, Saul.
Yeah, I'm doing it now. It might be ready before the we're done, but I know you can't see the hands up.
Okay.
We have another item on the agenda.
Please moderate that. I can't really see the hand.
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah.
Anyone's hands raised? Please go ahead, ask questions. I'm not able to see the hand.
Yeah. This is Sandeep from Samsung. Yeah, I mean, and you already touched upon the point that when you're describing that, we need to tell people what nephew is giving to you and what you can reuse from the nephew. Like, for example, I mean, you can describe better, but we can say, like, can give an answer that we are building a lot of KBT function, pipelines, controllers, which people can use for their different types of use cases. Maybe that can be an answer. Because generally when people see, right, they see that config is already existing, KBT package already existing, GitOps are already existing. So we know that we're stitching all of them and trying to bring up some sort of a solution out of it to orchestrate or to deploy our NFs. So maybe if we can, I don't know whether you can, how do you put this kind of answer in this diagram, but I think somewhere we have to put it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes,
and I think
maybe yeah, I tried to draw a diagram to explain this kind of stuff. I can share with you, but I will send you after the meeting, because I'm not capable to do it now. But I can share what I propose to you, Sana. I just wanted to present this high level vision of Nefio and with some function and so on. I will share with you after the meeting. It's not perfect, but it's just a way to, yeah.
Yeah, Eric, I remember your diagram. Insert that in one of the slide decks. And
Yeah,
I know
okay.
your diagram is really focused on this layer. Your
Yeah,
diagram
sure.
doesn't include this part, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly,
we can
exactly.
Right. So we can review that diagram, the one that you showed, and then we can extract something from that to fit in here.
Exactly.
Right.
Or maybe
So,
just maybe Sana, maybe something I'm not sure we discussed that, but I think that could be great for the event is also to demonstrate what is for a CNF vendor how we can benefit from Nefio, and how should he package his network function to be usable by Nefio. And I think I don't know if we have someone to explain that during the event. I think that should be very useful.
yeah, the network function vendors can benefit from Nefio, but essentially my personal feeling is that they will not benefit from Nefio. And there are reasons that I believe in. And of course, that's the point that we should bring up. Maybe there should be a dedicated panel to the network function vendors and get their views on how are they going to use Nefio, because they won't use Nefio. It's just not aligned with the existing commercial models. Eric, have you read the document that we published? Orange was a big part of publishing that document, the NGMN manifesto.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
right? And you know, there are things about Project Silva, and there are things that we would like to change with the network function vendors. And there's so many open questions. And all those open questions are actually the enabling factors, which can actually enable the network function vendors to adopt some of the Nephew principles. But it's a very slow momentum. And a discussion dedicated to network function vendors in the event, I think would be a very good idea. Tol, maybe we can take it back to Kandan and see if we can do that.
Okay.
Right? And there is also one more diagram, and people who are working on the ORAN right now are welcome to put comments and welcome to edit this diagram, because we do need to have a extremely high level view with the SMO and show that what are the components of the SMO where Nephew could potentially play a role. Again, the prescriptive detail of the O1 and O2 doesn't mean that Nephew is producing the O1 or O2 APIs, but it means that it's going to be producing APIs that replaces the function and existing scope of the O1 and O2, which can also be replaced by user stories. So this diagram is also open for questions and comments. And we couldn't get to the service assurance part because we spent more time on discussing that. I do want some discussion on the first day around our high level understanding of the Nephew scope and how does that fit with the rest of the ecosystem. And one looking forward slide for the various working groups evolutionary path. Eventually, what this working group is going to be producing in the context of not just R1 and R2, they're just placeholders, but the long-term view of this working group on what that is producing. It's something also open for comments if you guys have good ideas of the working groups. Insert some points here, and I think we will need one more session to discuss together and explore that. My hope was that on day 2, we gather volunteers who can actually go through the deeper dives of these working groups discussions. Tall, I would suggest maybe one discussion on ORAN and one on the service assurance, where we have made some good progress. Would be a good time, would be good use of time the second day and deeper dives on that. And we'll find volunteers from the community to do that. I think service assurance is already well covered. You guys are working on it. Maybe someone can present, and we'll find someone for ORAN as well, because that's a very interesting working group for a lot of people who would be in the room that day.
Hey, Sana, so there's already, I mean, you know, the OAI folks are doing some of the RAN stuff already, so that might be, you know, the person.
Excellent. I don't know if they are here.
That, right?
Okay.
Maybe
they are excellent to basically come and give a deeper dive on this working group, and we can structure that as well. And Tall, I'm also looking for an opportunity to basically find additional volunteers who can sign up for these working groups, because currently, if you look at this is the link for the working groups. If you look at that, we haven't had a very strong representation of volunteers on those groups because we are repeating the same people again. Maybe in that discussion, the day 1 discussion, we'll find more volunteers to basically work on these working groups and lead some of the work alongside. So looking forward to more people actually joining these.
Yeah, for working group 4, Sandeep, I can see, sure. We have a lot of discussions on SDK developments for Nephew, so I can.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea. But what me and Kaushik felt is that initial purpose of the working group 4 in this SIG wasn't the SDK development. I think we were more focused on the UI and experience, on how do we onboard a network function and what is the end user experience on that. So we were more focused on the northbound side of that integration element. Now it got extremely focused on the SDK development. I think that working group is hijacked into SIG automation. Tol, have you added that SDK development working group under automation? Is that going to be covered with that?
Well, so I wasn't present in the meeting where we decided on the 4 working groups. I'm a little confused about how they're divided up. It seems to have happened rather quickly. I can say I discussed with Bernard, you know, work group 1 to really take over modeling for Nephew. So the issue of vendor onboarding, you know, we put it as user experience, but who is the user here? Are we talking about both vendors as users and telcos as users? I'm a little bit confused about work group 4. Yeah,
the telcos are the users. Telcos are the users.
Yeah.
Because any product
telcos are the users, then why are we putting vendor onboarding there? I'm not very clear.
Where is vendor onboarding?
Well, Helm and operators from SIG2's perspective is all about onboarding vendors, right? That's the kind of implementation detail. Helm support.
So do you know what do we do with Helm charts in TELUS today? I don't know about the other operators. We are receiving Helm charts as is from a vendor, and then the rest of the things we do ourselves. So we are managing. Now, we are not designing the Helm charts, but we are responsible for deploying the Helm charts with all in-house tooling, with all in-house templates. No vendors involved in that process. So we write Toscas for that. We write any CRDs required for that. We work with the infrastructure directly. We have Red Hat, OpenShift, for example. So to me, the UI and experience is an experience that the operators actually describe. And when I was publishing the document, all the NGM and Cloud Native Manifesto, about 10 different operators were actually using a common voice that they would like to take the ownership of the DevOps into their own organization. So if somehow vendors are still stuck doing it, it's because it's an interim period. Like telcos want to do that. Telcos are not fully equipped with the skill set. That's why vendors are coming and helping them, and vendors are making money with that. So maybe they're keeping some of that work to themselves to drive professional services. But there was a common consensus that operators should be driving the network function onboarding to the cloud, managing it, and making it self-serve for them.
Yeah,
so that's
I
the
guess
vision.
that my only issue is the name here. I understand the scope of work group 4. So, you know, Tosca and Helm are, I would say, northbound and southbound integrations. But we can call it user experience, but I don't think that's a user experience. That's kind of implementation details. That's my problem with the name of the work group. But I think it's pretty clear. Sandeep is leading it, I think, very properly here. So a big shout out to Sandeep to really, it's the only work group right now of these 4 that is making real progress. There's weekly meetings, and we like this been taken over by the operator CK, but I don't see it as being taken over. I think it's exactly in the scope of what this work group is supposed to do, right? It's written right here, operators and Helm. So I think this work group is working correctly. I'm confused by its name. The other work groups, I haven't made any progress yet, right? Except maybe work group 1. Myself and Bernard have been talking about models. So I have some homework to consolidate all of the existing models that I would say are emergent from from SIG2, put them in a kind of document with a topology for it to see all the different types, and allow work group 1 to really own modeling for all of Nefio.
Right. So Tol, you mentioned the working group 1's role to be only focused on modeling, which is what is, of course, a part of scope. But when me and Kaushik were sitting together, of course, the working group 1's outcome was also supposed to work with the orchestration ecosystem, standards, products, and open source projects interaction, because a lot of time we are communicating with ORAN, we are communicating with ONAP people.
That's work group 2. You put ORAN under work group 2. So I think the work group organization is a little bit confusing to me. It's not very clear to me.
Right, it's some overlapping work in that. But the working group 1's, one of the function of the working group 1 was also to produce diagrams like the ones that I discussed with you. Produce them, agree with the community, and publish them so that we have some scoping of Nefio in the broader ecosystem of the standards and industry. Was also one of the mandate of working group 1.
Yeah. By the way, I know we're out of time, but I already created my slide. I'll share the link again in the chat. And I just created a new slide with my version. I call it a Tol's version. It's slide number 5 in the deck. So you can see it in the chat. Perfect. I just shared it.
Should we resume the discussion on the next SIG meeting and review your diagram as well, Tol?
Sure. But I know we have the service assurance discussion too. Maybe until the summit, I would like to humbly suggest that we have 2 meetings per week again, because we just have so much to cover and organize before the summit. And we're obviously not aligned on exactly what we want to present there. So maybe make sure that we
do that. Monday and Thursday, if we can make it work.
Yeah,
would that work for everyone? Right?
It's Thursday next week, is it? Not this week, because I think the TSC meetings are this time next week, tomorrow.
Right. Not this week, but for next week we can do Monday and Thursday.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, I'll fix the calendar and I'll send out the note on the Slack channel as well. And Tol, you shared the link as well, right? On with everybody.
I did, yes, and it was a little bit complicated, Sana. So please use the new copy of the link that I sent, and don't use your document because it's we're now using it's not the same document. It had to be copied.
Okay, so your link has everything from my sites as well?
Yes, all I
Okay,
did was add an additional slide, and it is world commentable. Everybody can comment. I didn't make it
Okay.
world editable because that might be dangerous. But
Okay.
if anybody has it specifically wants to edit, just send me a request and I will give you permission to edit as well.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. We'll
Thanks.
circle back again on the Monday's discussion.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.